Quorum being present, the subcommittee will come to order. We have an 8-vote series that will require the subcommittee to recess for about 45 minutes as soon as votes are called. I understand that Assistant Secretary Burson has a hard stop at 4 o'clock, so we'll return immediately after votes to conclude the opening portion of the hearing and then move to classified setting. Following testimonies and member questions, we'll conclude there and we'll conclude our time today. So I am going to, in the essence of time, skip over my opening statement, but I want to start off with just saying a couple of things. First off, I'm deeply saddened by the loss of life in Brussels today at the hands of evil men. I want to dedicate today's hearing to the victims of today's attacks and their families. I led my very first congressional delegation trip to Brussels in 2014 to look exactly at foreign fighter flow, foreign fighter threat, and the ways the U.S. and our European allies could better cooperate on homeland security issues. And only a day before my visit, an ISIS foreign fighter had returned to Brussels and shot up a Jewish museum, killing 4 people before he tried to flee to Africa. So today's depraved acts in Brussels following Paris attack demonstrate again that evil and evil men's intentions continue to rip apart the fabric of free Western societies through acts of terror and fear. It brings to mind Winston Churchill's words, "Let us learn our lessons. Never, never, never believe any war will be smooth and easy. Always remember, however, sure you are that you can easily win, that there would not be a war if the other man did not think he also had a chance. So we must show enemies that they have no chance of victory." And we do that in part through strong defenses and secure borders. So I want to start the hearing. We'll go and jump right in and submit our opening statements for the record. The ranking member agrees with me, so I'll just go ahead and recognize Mr. Gonzalez for his opening statement. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ranking Member and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on border security and vulnerabilities in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's an honor to be here with my colleague and friends from the Department of Homeland Security. First, just to summarize my oral remarks, I wanted to first thank this committee in my capacity as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Central America and the Caribbean for its bipartisan support for our strategy in Central America. You allowed us to increase funding for fiscal year 2015 and supported the President's fiscal year 2016 request with $750 million, providing us with the tools to help these governments make a real difference on the ground. So thank you, and look forward to continue working with you on this. Now, effective border management in Latin America and the Caribbean is vital to our economic prosperity and national security. Throughout the hemisphere, we're working with governments to eliminate trade barriers, integrate electricity grids and energy markets, connect national infrastructures, and cement commercial relationships. As evidence, I offer that our $1 trillion trade relationship and over 3 million American jobs supported by our economic relationship in Canada and Mexico demonstrate what's possible when governments collaborate actively. At the same time that we're using our border cooperation to promote prosperity, we are equally determined to use them to safeguard the homeland and to ensure safe, legal, and orderly migration to the United States. Border security was the focus of the recent Canada state visit. We already share travel information with Canada, including our respective no-fly lists, and the President and Prime Minister Trudeau used their meeting to discuss what more we can do to secure our borders while actively promoting commerce. We're also working with Mexico on border enforcement at both its northern and southern border to regulate migration, combat smuggling, and target narco-traffickers. And our counterterrorism cooperation with Mexico is excellent. During his 4th visit to Mexico under this administration, Vice President Biden discussed border security with Mexican President Peña Nieto, as he chaired at the same time the 3rd meeting of the U.S.-Mexico High-Level Economic Dialogue. Border security has also been at the front and center in the Vice President's active engagement on Central America since 2014. During his latest meeting with Northern Triangle leaders here in Washington on February 24th, the 3 presidents reaffirmed their commitment to continue awareness campaigns about the risk of undocumented migration, deepen the fight against human smuggling and trafficking, continue regional border security coordination, the strengthening of task forces and development of joint intelligence and border security projects, and facilitate the return, repatriation, and especially the reintegration of migrants who do not qualify for humanitarian protection in the United States. Our efforts in the Caribbean are aimed at combating drug trade and other transnational criminal threats, and we work in lockstep with the U.S. Coast Guard, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security to support regional, maritime, and aerial domain awareness by improving radar coverage and information sharing between partner nations. Caribbean governments are using U.S.-provided equipment and training to identify threats and carry out interdiction operations. And the UN Office of Drugs and Crime Container Control Program is establishing dedicated container profiling units to improve port security. In South America, the tri-border area of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay is a focus for regional law enforcement efforts, as you know from your recent congressional delegation. Governments in the region have long been concerned about arms and drug smuggling, document fraud, money laundering, trafficking in persons, and the manufacture and movement of contraband goods through the tri-border area. And we are working with all three governments on their efforts to improve border management and combat smuggling. Through training, and we brought justice and police officials from Paraguay to regional conferences on money laundering conducted with the Department of Justice. So, Mr. Chairman, to conclude, throughout our efforts in the Hemisphere, U.S. strategy and development and program design has been an active exercise of coordination between the Departments of State, Homeland Security, Justice, Commerce, USAID, and others. Indeed, funding from the Department of State and USAID supports a lot of the work of our partner agencies. At the same time, the expertise and experience of our DHS colleagues, as well as others in departments and agencies, have helped us refine our approach, and we continue to look for ways to maximize our coordination. And I'll close where I began, Mr. Chairman. The U.S. Congress is a vital partner to the administration, and we look forward to engaging with you on our discussion today on border security and vulnerabilities in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and I look forward to engaging in the discussion.
Thanks so much. Assistant Secretary Burson.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Sires, Mr. Yoho, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you once again, particularly in the company of my distinguished colleagues, Messrs. Gonzalez and Kubiak. I wanted to express our gratitude, certainly mine, for the comments you made with regard to the events in Brussels. I think in retrospect it will be seen in terms of European security and the effect on its borders as a game changer, building on what happened in Paris in January. I was at a meeting of the European Institute today in which people were reacting to the events in Brussels, and I thought it would be useful in the context of the hearing that you and your staff have structured to offer some comments that I offered there, because in fact Europe is in the midst of a confluence of migration, refugees, asylum seekers, and terrorists. And in fact, it has set the European market on its back, and the Eurozone and the Schengen zone it's placed them at great risk. And in looking at the way in which the European nations have reacted to the crisis that they faced with respect to border security, we begin to see them shutting down their individual borders, renouncing the Schengen zone, and generally hunkering down in ways that were reminiscent of the way in which we handled border security in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. When we shut down our airports, we shut down our seaports, we actually backed traffic south into Mexico and north into Canada by 10 to 20 miles as we looked at every trunk and we processed every passenger. And I thought and reflected for our European colleagues today how different our border security looks. To be sure, we are not seamless, and we are not perfect, and we are in a mode of continuous improvement, as the discussion in the SCIF will undoubtedly focus on some of the issues that we should not take up in public session. But think about the difference in the way in which we handle border security from 15 years ago. We used to see borders as lines on a map, the line that separated us from Mexico or Canada. And in fact, we now come to see, because in fact we've learned that Homeland Security is intrinsically transnational. That is to say, there is hardly an event that affects us inside our homeland that does not have a cause or effect that originates outside the homeland. So we start to look at border security in terms not just of lines, but it flows, and in a global world that makes a lot of sense in terms of the constant movement of migrants, capital, labor, electrons, goods, and people constantly back and forth across the line. So we've come to see the fact that our ports of entry, the 327 airports, seaports, and land ports, are not the first line of defense, but rather they are the last line of defense, and that what we have to do is secure the flow of goods and people toward the border lines, toward our homeland, as far away from them as possible, and as early in time before the arrival at the border. And we've implemented that, as the testimony of my colleagues and I today will again document, but with which the chairman, ranking member Yoho are familiar. The second thing that was pointed out as so that in fact don't move away from your don't just hunker down at your borderline, but manage the flows, and I think our testimony will show that we do that. Second is don't fragment your border agencies. I know that in the 1990s there were at each of our ports of entry there were 3 separate port managers, one from Treasury for Customs, one from Justice for Immigration, and one from Agriculture for Agricultural Inspection. As a result of the creation of DHS, we have actually created an integrated set of missions that will improve over time, as the Defense Department has, to actually perform a single border security function effectively. Third, we recognize that you cannot stop everything. We're looking for a needle in a haystack because in fact 97, 98 or more % of the passing of people and goods perfectly lawful and legitimate. And when we look for the needle in a haystack, we have developed means and methods of doing it, but we recognize that it's based on risk management and making assessments and managing our borders, not seamlessly, but with the data that we have and the intelligence that we can garner. Lastly, we've learned that we cannot do this alone, that we have to do it in partnership, not only inside the government, among the agencies of the United States government, but also with foreign partners. And a lot of our border security today, with regard to migration, as well as drugs, as well as intellectual property protection, as well as counterterrorist activity, depends on the partnerships that we have created with our foreign partners. As Mr. Gonzalez indicated, we have just embarked on a massive effort in partnership with Central America. It will not solve the problem overnight. These problems are in the making over generations, but we have actually taken, and I take it during the course of the hearing, we can explore some of the departures that bode well or better than the situation we've seen. With regard to the Caribbean, we have similar efforts of partnership, and I hope to be able to take those up, Mr. Chairman, in the course of the questions and answers. So in conclusion, the challenge of our times is that the future is not what it used to be, as the French poet said. But we have changed the way in which we manage the border, and I look forward to answering your questions so we can explore where there have been improvements and where there remains work to be done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Kubiak.
Thank you. As today's attacks demonstrate, the threat continues to evolve and challenge our law enforcement response, but I am confident our strong global partnerships build our capability to identify criminals, terrorists, and those networks that support their actions. As the goal of the hearing is today to address Western Hemisphere affairs, I will focus specifically on that area, but the accomplishments and programs that will be discussed today are representative of our efforts globally. In the Western Hemisphere, ICE has 23 offices in 9 countries, staffed by about 111 people, who work on capacity building and exchange of best practices with our law enforcement counterparts, and then operationalize those capabilities through joint investigations covering a full range of ICE's broad investigative authorities, and work with our partner nations to repatriate their nationals. We are, at our core, a border law enforcement agency, and partner with our foreign law enforcement counterparts, immigration and customs officers around the world to investigate transnational criminal organizations operating globally. Thanks to the additional appropriated funds from Congress in FY15 and continued funding support from the Departments of State and Department of Defense, we've expanded critically important programs like the Transnational Criminal Investigative Units, our Biometric Identification Transnational Migration Alert Program, and the Trade Transparency Units. We continue to build our capacity and the capacity of our host country counterparts through training programs such as our Cross-Border Financial Investigations Program and our Strategic Trade Control Workshops. We put these programs and training to work through ambitious international and multilateral whole of U.S. government joint investigative enforcement operations such as Operation Citadel. ICE's transnational criminal investigative units investigate all forms of illicit trade, travel, and finance. TCIUs are comprised of foreign law enforcement officials, customs officers, immigration officers, and prosecutors who undergo a strict vetting process and complete a prerequisite 3-week training course at our Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. Once trained, the TCIU members work collaboratively with our attaché personnel to address significant joint law enforcement threats throughout the hemisphere. Through this program, ICE attachés share law enforcement intelligence, conduct joint investigations, and assist in prosecutions of transnational criminal organizations both in the host country and in the United States. TCIUs are currently operational in 9 countries and comprise more than 250 vetted foreign trained law enforcement officers who in FY15 alone, disrupted and dismantled criminal organizations through the arrest of almost 700 suspects, the seizure of nearly 17,000 pounds of cocaine, the seizure of more than $6.7 million in illicit cash, and $13 million worth of counterfeit merchandise, not to mention numerous firearms, ammunition, vehicles, and vessels. One of ICE's highest priorities in the region is investigating human smuggling and trafficking. The Human Smuggling Cell serves as the U.S. government's coordination center for all human smuggling investigations, and through it, ICE and CBP together harness DHS's unique access to immigration, border, and financial data to advance efforts to counter these organizations. The cell provides intelligence, coordination, and supports U.S. and foreign investigations to more effectively address the specific regional threat. For the last 4 consecutive years, as an example, ICE led Operation Citadel, a regional, multilateral, and multi-agency effort to address all transnational criminal organization operations, but with a specific focus on human smuggling. This operation coordinated attachés and TCIUs in the region and combined partner nation capacity building, training, and real-time intelligence, interdiction, and investigative operations at international seaports, airports, land borders, and in the interior of those countries. In FY15, Operation Citadel dismantled several large transnational human smuggling organizations. Most significantly, one investigation coordinated collaborative investigations at the same time in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and the United States, dismantling a prolific transnational criminal organization operating throughout Central America and throughout the hemisphere. As a result, 14 separate human smuggling routes were identified and disrupted, including routes used by smugglers to move third country nationals from the Eastern Hemisphere through the Western Hemisphere and into the United States across the southwest border. In total, Citadel's 2015 results included 210 arrests, the recovery of 51 unaccompanied minors, the seizure of $2.1 million in currency, over 2,100 biometric collections or enrollments, and the initiation of 68 new and ongoing investigations. There is much work still to do, and the need to continue to strengthen international partnerships through training and joint operations, but ICE is fully engaged in addressing current and future threats. I am confident that we will continue to build upon this momentum and generate additional considerable operational achievements as we move forward. Thank you for the opportunity to answer your questions.
Thank you. We'll move into the question portion of the hearing, and we'll try to get through as much of the question portion as we can. When we break for votes, we're just going to end the portion of the committee hearing here. When we come back for votes, we'll go straight to the SCIF. So I'd ask panelists to head on down to the SCIF when we leave for votes. Mr. Gonzalez, following the Paris attack in November, there were press reports indicated that the EU was considering tighter and systematic ID checks. Let me back up. Press reports and other reports surfaced that a Syrian individual under investigation for participating in the attacks had traveled to Brazil, Ecuador, and Colombia in July before bribing a Colombian official to leave the country. Interpol stated in November that of the estimated 25,000 foreign terrorist combatants, thought to be operating across the globe. Only 5,600 have been identified by law enforcement agents. So what can you tell me about the individual that may have traveled to Colombia and Ecuador and Brazil and him leaving the country? And I'd also like for you to talk about the fact that we have a lot of folks from Syria and other places traveling to tri-border region on falsified or fake documents, exchanging those documents, and then transiting Latin America, either to come here or going other places. We just traveled. We heard from the Paraguayans, and this has continued to be the case. We saw the 5 Syrians that were apprehended in Honduras. So we know folks are traveling to this area. We know what one of the Paris attackers possibly did. I'd like for you to talk about that briefly if you can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we, first, thank you for taking that trip, because I know this is an issue that you've been active on, and it's something where I know our whole of government is actively devoting resources and time into. On this particular case, sir, we heard the same reports, we looked into it, and we have nothing to actually corroborate that it was somebody that was associated with the Paris attacks. In fact, what we did find was that it may have been a woman that was there for fleeing violence from Syria. But it's something that we'll continue to actually look into, given the seriousness of the case, and we can expand on this in the classified setting, definitely. Now, with regard to the tri-border region, it is a place, as you saw when you visited Ciudad del Este, that it's a place that doesn't have active border controls, and it's incredibly concerning. When we actually talk about perhaps issues that you've actually been very active on as well, Iran and Hezbollah, what we have found is that it is a place that illegal actors will use actively for financing, right? So that's definitely obvious. What we have not been able to find is whether it's actually organized or whether it's actually being used as a stopping point off for any sort of organized attack or any sort of terrorist activity. However, it is a source of migration, as the migration patterns throughout South America are incredibly complicated. And the way that we've approached this, Mr. Chairman, is because we're in March, I'm going to use a March Madness analogy, is we're using man-on-man defense, as Assistant Secretary Alan Burson had said, it's a needle in a haystack, and we're actually actively looking for individuals that might pose a threat. And then on Central America and the Caribbean, where I played a more active role, we're playing zone defense, where what we've been doing is investing resources to make sure that there's a presence of the state, and that the rule of law is something that is being advanced. And that helps us with whether it's migration, whether it's trafficking in persons, whether it's narco traffickers. If you're actually working to support the governments of the Northern Triangle, the Southern Triangle, and other parts in the Caribbean as well, on the maritime, on the aviation, on border controls, something that we partner with DHS on, but also more importantly, not just regarding the physical border as the area where we would focus, but with the judicial sector, strengthening police, and actually working to address crime and violence. We've actually seen amazing results, and in fact, we've had a couple operations recently where we've been able to intercept special interest aliens from different parts of the world, and of course, getting these countries to defend against undocumented migration. I will say, sir, just my last point on this is that the majority of individuals that are traveling, be they from special interest alien countries or other places, we found the large majority of these individuals are actually fleeing violence from other parts of the world. But of course, we have to be very vigilant, and we're looking at those individuals that might actually pose a threat, and when we do, we act and we work with these governments to respond.
Thank you for that. We saw very clearly that there are no border controls between Brazil and Paraguay. In fact, at Ciudad del Este, it was wide open. An armed guard or two were about it. We learned from the Paraguayans that there's no border control north of there anyway. In fact, a county road dissects the border, and so when you're driving down the road, you might be in Brazil, you might be in Paraguay. So I guess I appreciate state and DHS working very well with the Paraguayans on counter-narcotics and counterterrorism efforts, and I want to continue that. So if we have episodes of, say, these 5 Syrians that were apprehended in Honduras, and I think those were the ones we know about that were caught. Secretary Burson, you talked about a secure border. I agree that at our border checkpoints where we're pulling agriculture out to inspect it, we're trying to identify those coming across the border. And at the border checkpoints, absolutely, we're doing it a lot better than we ever have. My concern on our southern border is all the areas that we're not patrolling, we're not fencing, we're not apprehending anyone. We're actually allowing interior enforcement to have a lead role in that, but then the administration is actually real lax with interior enforcement as well. That's policies of the administration I hope change in the next administration. But if someone can transit through Latin America, through the tri-border region, hoping to do nefarious aims in the United States, then they could get to Mexico, and just like the unaccompanied children or all the migrant workers that come into this country, enter our southern border without going through a border checkpoint that you talk about. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what the agency's doing on, not the border checkpoints, not in Laredo or Nogales or any, I'm talking about all those areas between the two. And whatever you can tell us in that, because I will tell you this, my constituents are concerned that the soft underbelly of this nation is our southern border that's unsecured. If you could speak to that.
Mr. Chairman, remembering our last exchange, we have different set of experiences. I remember when this border was absolutely out of control. When I became the U.S. Attorney, the so-called border czar in the 1990s, we were arresting 1 million, 1.2 million, 1.4 million unlawful migrants to the United States every year. That was an era when we had 3,000 Border Patrol agents, no cameras, no technology, and as a result of a bipartisan effort of President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama, we invested $18 billion a year. And I simply disagree with the notion that there has been no difference in our southwest border. And we have 22,000 agents, 19,000 of whom are on the southern border. So we have a difference of view of the relative state of the border, and I just think we should agree that no one claimed that we were ever going to seal this border like the Berlin Wall tried to seal people from leaving West Berlin, but and no one should claim that it is a seamless border. That is to say that it is not susceptible to smuggling of people. But I can assure you, with the number of apprehensions down at a 70-year low, at a time when we have 10 times the number of agents that I remember being on that border, the border is not what it used to be. And but let me take up the.
Let me just speak to one comment you just made. If I'm playing a football game, I can affect the score by not scoring. Apprehensions are down. I agree with you. But the Border Patrol people I talk to, the apprehensions are down because the administration wants them to be down.
Sir?
I still think that we have people crossing our border, and we can disagree, but you can affect the score 2 ways. I yield back to you.
So I've talked to some of those Border Patrol union officials over the 20 years I've been involved in border control, and respectfully, you should look at the axe that there is to grind there. The fact is that it is a disservice to the men and women of the United States Border Patrol, sir, to claim that they are not doing their job on the border. They do, but let's leave that argument for another day. I think I understand your point, but I'd like to take up the 5 Syrians because I think they actually demonstrate good points and bad points of our contemporary situation. So on November 17th, 2015, 5 Syrians were encountered in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, in Toncontin. They had arrived on a flight from Costa Rica, and they presented photo-altered Greek passports. Records checks indicated that the Greek passports had been reported stolen from Athens, Greece, and they were interviewed by HSI transnational criminal investigative unit agents stationed in Honduras, the TCI units that Mr. Kubiak referred to. And the Syrians indicated that they were en route to the United States. They were placed in Honduran jails for 17 days, and they were eventually released because of local laws that limited the amount of time you could hold someone based on the administrative violation and on local asylum laws. The subjects then proceeded by bus to Guatemala, and on March 20th, 2016, 4 of the subjects were encountered at Laredo, Texas, and they requested asylum. They were interviewed, processed, and transported by the Border Patrol and then by ERO to the Rio Grande Detention Center and are currently detained pending outcome of their asylum claims. So here are the good points. We are doing a lot of work beyond the border with foreign partners to actually identify threats, particularly when they come from so-called special interest areas. But we did not have the capacity to take any action to either assist the Hondurans to continue to detain and then to transport people back because of the lack of authority. People then got to the border and claimed asylum, and as you know, because of the lack of resources provided to the immigration courts, those hearings will not take place in an expedited time so that we could take action. So I think that said but by the same token, they were not released simply to go into the country not because we had discovered any facts about any terrorist ties that they have, because in fact they were fully vetted, but they were held because in fact we do not want to risk any danger from this particular population at this particular time. So I think the case is actually a good indicator of progress that we've made, but an enormous amount of work we have to do, both to assist our foreign partners to develop border control capacities, but also, frankly, to mend our immigration processes here at home.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to the ranking member.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say the Chairman put together a great Codel, which was very informative to me, and we certainly learned a lot about, especially water crossing in some of these areas that have nothing. They just go back and forth and without any kind of scrutiny. Can you define for me or discuss how the U.S. government defines special interest aliens? How do you do that?
If I might, and then I'd ask Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Kubiak to add. There are actually different definitions in part depending on different agencies, but they all tend to be outside the Western Hemisphere. They tend to be either a listing of countries. I've seen listings up to 35 countries. Other agencies take a more restricted terrorist-related or terrorist-centric view of the definition. But I take your point. We have no standard definition of special interest aliens, but I will tell you that, consistent with Mr. Kubiak's point, when it comes to the checks that DHS personnel are making in Panama and Mexico, we take the biometrics of every person who is from outside the hemisphere so that we can check them against the holdings of the United States government.
Because I'm thinking, we were in Costa Rica, and we were with the president, and obviously Costa Rica is going through this issue with the Cubans in the Costa Rica coming through, but only 60% of those people going through there are Cubans. They said 40% were basically made of other nationalities, from Africa, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan. How do you determine there which ones are of special interest to us?
First, Mr. Sires, with due respect, I was corrected recently in preparation for the hearing on the proportion of special interest aliens. In fact, the large majority of people who are coming up from Panama into Costa Rica are actually Cubans. The 3/4 of the flows are actually Cubans at this juncture, and the number of special interest aliens from outside the hemisphere are actually a relatively smaller percentage, and a small number in terms of we're talking about 4,000 or 5,000.
In my view, a smaller number is easier to get through our borders because you tend to pile them up together with the other people.
So, in fact, having visited, in fact, I would urge, because I agree with Mr. Gonzalez and the chairman and you, ranking member, that visiting the tri-border area is an eye-opener and an important insight for American public servants, legislators, and executive branch alike. I suggest that you consider going down to Metati in the Darien, in Panama, to view the work that's being done by HSI and Customs and Border Protection in concert with the American Embassy and Ambassador John Feely in Panama. It's interesting, but you won't. What the arrangement we have there, Mr. Cyrus, is that we stop people. The Panamanians detain people for 7 or 10 days or longer, depending on whether or not they come from particular countries, so that we can actually take their fingerprints and then check them so that, in fact, we can identify any high-risk persons coming through. But most of those people are not, most of the people coming up through Panama are not special interest.
But you know my concern, right? Sometimes they get bundled in with the rest. But you said, did I hear you correct? You said special interest aliens, you have one set of definitions, you have a set of definitions. There's no one set definition?
So, Congressman, I think first to your other question, if I may, sir, I think part of the migration issue that we're facing, and Mr. Kubek has some excellent examples of where we're cooperating with DHS and HSI to address the issue, is regardless of the definition of special interest aliens, in some regards, the flows that are coming through are ones that are taking up bandwidth for border officials, right? And a lot of this is a result of what I would say is less than strict immigration standards in some of these countries that actually led to what you saw as the almost 8,000 Cubans that ended up stuck in Costa Rica. So one of the things that we've been doing is working with Costa Rica, Panama, and Colombia, and even Ecuador to try to get them to implement stricter visa standards, to actually stamp the passports so that when they're traveling through, in some of these countries, Costa Rica, for example, by law, has to deport an immigrant to the country they were just in. But if their passport's is not stamped, it makes it complicated because they don't actually show where their travel route is. So we're actually working on them on the kind of reforms that they have to undertake. But then when they actually there are third country nationals that are in the country, what we'll do is we will work with DHS and others to try to see if there's anybody of interest in that group that we need to actually, that poses a law enforcement challenge. And we can dive into this in the classified briefing to a certain extent. But it's been a two-pronged approach. And then to your question, sir, just on the special interest aliens, is DOD has a larger definition than the State Department does. And a lot of it has to do with where I think it's our numbers either 38, or 36 or 38, and I can confirm that. And the DOD, I think, has a 39 number. DHS has a more expansive number, and a lot of it has to do with countries that you see as posing a risk. And so I think DHS poses a wider net because of the migration issues that they're of course working on.
Sir, it's exactly your question for the reason that I didn't use special interest alien in my opening statement, because we are trying to get away from that specific terminology because of this inherent problem that you've just identified. What we're referring to is third country nationals not from the Western Hemisphere. In other words, people from outside of our region of the world. And it's specific because we are not necessarily worried about specific nationalities, although there is some higher threat in certain areas of the world. What we're worried about are bad actors within those communities, to your point exactly. And it is the ones and twos along the way that may have some intentional bad harm that we need to ferret out, as Mr. Burson said, shrink the haystack to make sure that we have really the best information possible about those that intend harm to the United States or to the region. And so it's programs like BitMap and our transnational criminal investigative units that we've worked in partnership with the other government agencies that allow us, and in the classified setting I will get into much more detail in a couple of examples to give you how this exactly is working, but we're able to identify individuals to collect biometrics long before they get to the United States. Mr. Burson did hint at, even in some cases when we're able to do that, we are not able to then stop their forward and onward progression to the United States, where they can show up at a port of entry and claim some form of relief.
I have other questions, but we'll get to it later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Yoho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate all of you being here. Mr. Burson, I appreciate the briefing before we went down to South America. It was a great trip. And I thought it was interesting when we were talking about the border security there in the tri-border area, how they were telling us how lax it was, but when we met with some of the dignitaries, they said, oh no, we've got good border security. And I saw a disconnect there. I think we're all in agreement that border security is a national security issue. That's something we all take seriously, obviously you do, but yet we see the lapses, and I appreciate the work that you guys have done from the 1990s to today, but it's a different game today. You know, back then we were worried more about people coming into this country, wanting jobs, wanting a better life, wanting opportunity, and the drug trafficking. Today we've got people that want to do us harm, and it's like a cake. You only need one drop of kerosene and it mess up the whole batter, and we can't afford any of that. And certainly we've seen that in what's going on in the European Union with Brussels, with Paris, with these attacks that, like you said, is going to shut down their whole economy. It's their 9/11. Can we afford another one, or do we want another one of those here in the United States? And you're talking about the control. You know, before 9/11, we were pretty lax. 9/11 taught us a lesson. Now we've got TSA. Now we're doing checks at the curb, more perimeter checks before they even get into the airport. Where do we go next? Do the people just 5 miles out from the airport? Or is it, you know, people coming into the city? Is it people coming into a state? At what point do we say enough's enough and really crack down or find a different way to crack down? Border security, to me, is a national security issue that has to be done. And I disagree with Mr. Trump wanting to build a wall. I don't think we need that. I think we have the technology, the personnel, and the resources that we can do a good job at that. But it can't be done by itself. It has to be done with enforcement of the laws already on the book. Because right now there's a global policy in around the world. People say there's a magnet. It's a global policy of on-enforcement of immigration laws. That if you get to this area, you get in and you get your pass go card, you know, pass jail free card. It's the lottery for so many people, and they're struggling to do whatever they can to get here. And if we can change some things, and this is what I'd like to hear from you guys, Mr. Kubiak, you were talking about what you guys are doing on immigration and customs. I visited the Jacksonville Custom and Border Patrol people, and they gave me several cases of where people were picked up. They took them back, put them on the plane to Honduras. A week later, they see them on I-10 driving by the same guy that deported them, and the guy's smiling at our Custom and Border Patrol agent, and it happens over and over again. They had several cases they showed me of convicted felons, whether it was DUIs or whether it was drugs or robbery, that were deported, but they're back in this country because there's a revolving door. Plus, we were told there were directives coming out of the DHS and out of the White House, and it was called PEP, the Presidential Enforcement Preference, where they're not enforcing, they're being told to let these people go. So we can do all the right things, and I commend the Customs Border Patrol agents. They're doing the right thing, but when you have policies that are counterproductive, you know, it's putting American lives at risk. I mean, all we have to do is look at the story of Kate Steinle, that young lady that was murdered out in San Francisco in a sanctuary city. We're working on defunding those kind of cities, but not holding these people accountable and not allowing them back in. And when they're brought back in, they either need to be incarcerated or they need to make sure the host country keeps them in there. We just saw what happened over the weekend in the Farmingham neighborhood up here in Maryland, where 4 people, 3 of them I think had already been deported 1 or 2 times. They're back in this area, you know, causing crimes on American citizens. This is something that until we have a paradigm shift in how we deal with this, it's going to continue. And then, God forbid, that terrorist comes in illegally that should have been stopped like you brought up in Honduras that did make it into Texas. Luckily, 4 of them got picked up. Was there one that didn't get picked up? So they picked them up, but how many have come through that haven't been picked up? And so what would you do? What would you recommend to us? And I heard you, Mr. Beerson, say that until we change how these other countries deal with the people that were picked up and how we can deport them, what needs to change on this end to force those countries to do that? Is it withholding foreign aid? Is it changing laws on our books? I would like to hear from both of you on that. What we need to do here to put an end to this, because right now I see a revolving door on too many things, and it's just a matter of time before somebody comes in and we have a problem. Did they?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the questions and for the opportunity to address. So just to answer your question first, the last question first, part of what I'm seeing and that I mentioned in the opening statement to a degree is, as you mentioned, in the 1990s prior to 9/11, we had a different border strategy, and we've changed that a lot over time. What I'm seeing through our international partnership and engagement with our foreign counterparts and through our collaboration with State Department is that that's changing as well down in Central America, South America, and Mexico. Specifically in Mexico, we've seen a increased engagement over the last 2 years, unlike any I've ever seen before, where they are attempting to address, and they have a long way to go, like we did pre-9/11 to the situation that we are today. But I think one of the things that we can do from here is a continued and constant capability building. We are never going to be able to enforce our way out of the illegal immigration floor solely. We have to have some impact on what we refer to as the push and pull factors that cause immigration. And so, as you know, I'm sure from your visit, a lot of the push factors are involved with reducing violence in the countries from which people are coming, Syria being the most tragic example, I think, in what's driving people out of that country. To continue to grow their economies so that we don't get as many economic migrants moving this way, and then to also work on reducing, as Mr. Burson said, some of the immigration challenges that we have in the United States and some of the loopholes that we're able to address.
Well, just along that lines there, the Ag Guest Worker Program, the H-1B visa, we've got farmers in our district that are going through the right process. They're recruiting the worker. They're going through the visa process. They get them to the United States. The workers know that the rules aren't going to be enforced, so they leave that farm and go into a different field of operation. Our farmers are calling ICE, and ICE says nothing we can do. Those policies need to change on this end because it'll put a stop on the change of people coming over here. And until we do that, people are just saying, hey, get to America. They're not going to enforce that. Don't worry about it. Those are the things that I want to see change. And what do you need to do in your agency? Who's preventing you from enforcing those laws on the book? Is it a directive coming out of the White House?
Sir, nobody's preventing us. We have resources, the priorities that have been set by the Secretary.
Secretary of?
Secretary Johnson.
Okay.
Department of Homeland Security, that outlines the way that immigration.
Why would they allow people to leave those H-1B visa that the farmer goes through to accomplish to get that person here legally? Why would they allow that not to be enforced?
So, sir, I'm not.
I'm sorry, it's H-2A visa.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not familiar specifically with that particular issue. I did spend some time as a special agent in charge in northern New York, where I worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we did do work in that.
Those are the things that if we can change them and enforce it, it would stop that magnet and that pull of people saying, hey, don't worry about it, man, they're slack on that, they're not going to do anything. And then you're going to get the radical jihadist terrorist that's going to come through on a work visa, and they're going to come in that way. And that's, I want to know who's going to be held accountable for that. What agency? What department? Who's going to answer to the kids, to the family of the parents that got damaged in that attack? Yeah, we should have enforced those laws, but nah, we didn't. We're all going to have to answer that, and I don't want to answer that. Let's see. And then the other thing that was brought up when I was visiting there was 1,200 miles of coastline in Florida. We have 90 CBP Custom Border Patrol agents, 70 boots on the ground. They did 4,000 arrests in the state of Florida, or in that whole district. And they need more agents, is what I was told. But there's some northeast states that have 400 agents, and they do 50 arrests a year. And is there a way to adjust those for, need?
I probably am best equipped to respond to that. So the allocation formulas by region, Mr. Yoho, depend on a variety of factors. Arrests are one, but you can imagine a colleague in Vermont or Michigan, North Dakota, South Dakota that would still be concerned about having a sufficient number of agents there to patrol the territory they're responsible for. So arrests are one, but I think CBP and Commissioner Kurlikowski can speak, or Deputy McAleenan more directly to current practice. There's a pretty sophisticated workforce allocation model that takes into account a variety of matters, which accounts, frankly, for the fact that of the 22,000 Border Patrol agents, 19,000 are in the 6 states of the four states of the southwest border. If I might, though, address 2 issues on what we could be doing abroad. So when, in fact, the CBP and HSI officers in Panama and Metati are running against special interest aliens or third country nationals, there is no capacity of the Panamanians right now to hold and detain large numbers. And the problem that we run into all the way up toward the southwest border is that we often have trouble getting travel documents to be able to deport and to assist. There is no funding to support Panama or the Central American countries to do their own deportations in a systematic way. As we know from our experience, it takes a system to actually apprehend, detain, care for, and then deport a person who has no lawful right to be in a particular country. The Central American countries are at the very threshold of being able to develop that. But it would help, actually, and I could go into specifics with you, happy to do it offline. There are a number of authorities that ERO, that ICE does not have acting abroad, that would permit it to actually assist in the deportation of people other than from the United States. The second point, I have to go back and remind you that we have 243 immigration judges in this country, and we have 2,000 federal judges. You cannot get the job done in a lawful, speedy, secure way with a paucity of resources. And when President Obama in 2014 asked the Congress for the resources to build an immigration court, we know what happened to that bill. But the problems we have to address internally as well as abroad, sir. I grant you that premise.